On today's menu, I have a plant-based club sandwich that isn't dry or sad, but actually has some juicy meatiness and a pretty damn good substitute for bacon. The secret to a good vegan club sandwich is to use two kinds of tofu. I've got a smoked tofu that is going to work a bit like bacon, and then a regular tofu that will try and emulate chicken breast. I cut the regular tofu in half diagonally and then cut those two halves in half. For the smoked tofu, I like to do thin strips so that they can get crispy and add that smoky, salty crunch that a bacon strip would. I then grab a flat container and add 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of Aleppo pepper, and 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika. To that, I add 2 tablespoons of soy sauce for some salt and umami and stir it up to create a marinade. Add in the tofu pieces and make sure to flip them so that the marinade covers both sides, and then let them marinate while you prepare your other ingredients. First up, a club sandwich must have a curry sauce. I start with 1 tablespoon of vegan mayo and then 2 tablespoons of vegan yogurt. This keeps the sauce rather light, which means that you can eat more of it. I then add 1 to 2 teaspoons of a relatively mild curry powder, as well as salt, pepper, and a squeeze of lemon. Sometimes I also add a teaspoon of Dijon mustard, but today I kept it simple. I also kept my fresh veggies very simple and only prepared a few slices of tomato and some lettuce. But, as always, this is not a fixed recipe, so add onions, cucumber, or some pickled things just as you like. Our tofu has now been marinating for about 5 minutes, so now I am going to add a tablespoon of starch. I use either cornstarch or potato starch, it doesn't really matter, and they both make the marinade adhere much better to the tofu and become very crispy once they're fried. You could also have the starch in a different bowl and then dip your marinated pieces in starch, but I personally want as little cleanup as possible, so I do everything in the same container. Once they're pretty well covered in starch, we can warm up a pan and add a generous amount of neutral oil. Remember that tofu is 0% fat basically, so it doesn't hurt to add a little extra in the frying process. Fry them on a medium heat for 2 to 3 minutes, and while that is happening you can prepare your smoked tofu. Toss them in the same container, and if there's no starch left then add a little bit more, as well as some spices if you want. I added a tiny bit more smoked paprika to really boost the smokiness. Once that is tossed in starch, the tofu chicken should have basically formed a crust and should now start to come loose from the pan. And if they're looking crispy, then flip them over and fry for another 2 to 3 minutes. Then fish them out of the pan and try to focus a little bit more than I did while recording this, because holy moly, that is rough to look at. But voila, some very crispy but still juicy tofu bites. Just listen to this. Anyway, fry the smoked tofu strips in the same oil for about 2 minutes on each side, or until they are super crispy. I also like to add a little bit of extra salt to make them even more bacon-like, and then you're pretty much done. I find that slicing the tofu at an angle makes it look nice and makes it perfect for a sandwich, because you get these beautiful little strips. Juicy on the inside and then a super crispy and salty layer on the outside. Make sure that you use a firm tofu here that isn't too pressed, because otherwise they might end up being a lot more dry than what you see here. For the assembly, get a nice piece of toast, then a generous serving of our curry sauce, which will add richness and bring everything together. And then on top of that, add some nice lettuce leaves and a couple of fat slices of tomato. Then comes the star of the show, a nice serving of our tofu chicken and 2 crispy strips of smoked tofu to bring some crunch, salt, and extra umami. A bit of extra sauce on top, cause why the hell not, and then another slice of bread to squash on top. This looks beautiful, but let's cut this thing open and see what it looks like inside. And Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, that looks pretty freaking good to me. And I promise you, it is. They're super juicy, savory as a murphy, and honestly a super quick and actually quite nutritious meal. So, what are you waiting for? Try and make it, and please let me know in the comments how it went. Love ya. I love a good club sandwich, and I think this vegan version works really well because you have the two textures of the tofu, one being the very juicy chicken like tofu, and then this crispy smoked tofu that works a little bit like bacon. And then just curry sauce to blend it all together. It's very nice.